If someone had told me love can start as a joke and survive the sober hour, I'd have scoffed. Have you ever found yourself in this spot? When your best friend lands the very thing you've quietly wanted your whole life, and you have to paste on a smile and act happy anyway? That's exactly what happened to Avery Bennett on a rainy Thursday afternoon in October. In her cramped Harborview studio, paint-stained easel leaning against the brick wall, her phone lit up and buzzed with a text from Lena Carter, her best friend of 8 years. The message was blunt. Nothing fancy at all. Can you come over? I have news. But something in those 5 words made Avery's chest tighten with dread. She knew Lena well enough to recognize when something big was happening. And lately, Lena had been acting strange. Secretive phone calls, mysterious dinner dates. That particular glow that people get when they're hiding something wonderful. Avery grabbed her leather jacket and headed out into the October drizzle, her heart pounding with each step toward Lena's pristine Crown District apartment. Lena had always been the responsible one, the architect who planned every detail of her life with mathematical precision, while Avery was the chaotic artist who lived paycheck to paycheck and painted her emotions onto canvas at 3 o'clock a.m. They were opposites in every way, which was probably why their friendship worked so perfectly, or why it hurt so much when Avery realized she was in love with someone who would never love her back. Lena's apartment building was everything Avery's wasn't. Doorman, marble lobby, elevators that actually worked. As Avery rode up to the 15th floor, she caught her reflection in the polished metal doors and tried to prepare herself for whatever news was waiting. She found Lena pacing in her spotless living room, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail, wearing the kind of designer dress that cost more than Avery made in a month. But it was the expression on Lena's face that made Avery's stomach drop. Pure radiant joy mixed with nervous excitement. "Avery, sit down," Lena said, gesturing to the cream-colored sofa that Avery had always been afraid to touch with her paint-stained fingers. "I have something to tell you, and I wanted you to be the first to know." Avery perched on the edge of the sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Okay, you're kind of freaking me out here. What's going on?" Lena's smile was so bright it could have powered the entire building. "Hey, if you're enjoying this story, go ahead and drop a like to help us grow even more. And let me know in the comments, on a scale from 0 to 10, what score would you give this story so far? Your feedback makes all the difference." She held out her left hand, and Avery's world came crashing down around her. The diamond ring was enormous, sparkling under the recessed lighting like a tiny star. It was beautiful, expensive, and everything Avery had nightmares about. "Ethan proposed last night," Lena said, her voice breathless with happiness. "We're getting married, Avery. I'm getting married." Avery felt like she was drowning, but she forced her face into what she hoped looked like excitement. "Oh my God, Lena. That's amazing." She jumped up and pulled Lena into a hug, holding her tightly to hide the tears that were threatening to spill over. Lena smelled like vanilla and success, like everything Avery could never be. "Tell me everything," Avery managed to say, pulling back and plastering on the biggest fake smile of her life. "How did he do it? Where did he propose?" Lena launched into the story with the enthusiasm of someone who had been waiting her whole life for this moment. Ethan had taken her to their favorite restaurant, the one where they'd had their first date 4 years ago. He had worked with the staff to hide the ring in her dessert, and when she found it, he'd gotten down on one knee right there in front of everyone. It was perfect, romantic, exactly the kind of proposal that Lena had probably dreamed about since she was a little girl. Avery listened and nodded and made all the right sounds, but inside she was screaming. She had been in love with Lena since their sophomore year of college, when Lena had found her crying in the library after a brutal critique of her artwork and had spent the entire night helping her see the beauty in her own creations. 8 years of being the best friend, the shoulder to cry on, the +1 to every event. 8 years of watching Lena date other people and pretending it didn't tear her apart every single time. And the best part, Lena continued, practically bouncing with excitement, is that we're going to have the wedding in 6 weeks. Ethan's family has connections at this amazing venue in the Hamptons, and if we move fast, we can get the December date we wanted. 6 weeks. Avery felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. 6 weeks, Lena, that's so soon. Are you sure you don't want to take more time to plan? We've been together for 4 years, Avery. We know what we want and we don't see any point in waiting. Lena's eyes were shining with happiness that made Avery feel sick. Besides, Ethan is getting that promotion at his firm, and we want to start our new life together as soon as possible. Avery nodded mechanically, but her mind was racing. 6 weeks. 6 weeks until Lena became Mrs. Ethan Caldwell, and any last hope Avery had been secretly harboring would be buried forever. 6 weeks to watch the woman she loved plan a future with someone else. I want you to be my maid of honor, Lena said suddenly, grabbing Avery's hands. I know it's a lot to ask with such short notice, but I can't imagine getting married without you standing beside me. The irony was so sharp Avery almost laughed. Standing beside Lena as she prepared to marry someone else, smiling, holding her flowers. Pretending joy felt like being asked to dig her own grave. Of course, Avery heard herself say, I'd be honored. Lena squeezed her hands. You're the best friend anyone could ask for. I don't know what I'd do without you. The words sliced through Avery like glass. Best friend. That was all she'd ever be, the loyal constant who would beam through Lena's wedding. While her heart shattered quietly. Actually, Avery said, surprising herself with how steady she sounded, I have an idea. What if we do a bachelorette party? One last hurrah before you're a married woman. Lena's eyes lit. That sounds perfect. What did you have in mind? Avery's mind kicked into overdrive, desperation fueling the need to mark the end of her secret hopes. Vegas, she blurted. Let's go to Vegas. This weekend. Fly out Friday, come back Sunday. Just you and me. One last wild adventure before you settle down. Lena hesitated. Vegas? Avery, you know I'm not really the Vegas type. I was thinking more like a spa weekend or maybe wine tasting in Napa. Come on, Lena. Avery pressed, knowing this might be her last chance to have Lena to herself, even if only as friends. When else will you get to be completely wild and irresponsible? After you're married, you'll be the perfect wife, bed by 10, a glass of wine with dinner. This is your moment to do something crazy. Avery watched her waver, the sensible part of Lena wrestling with the small voice that had always wondered what spontaneity might feel like. I don't know, Avery. What would Ethan think? Ethan doesn't have to know all the details, Avery said with a mischievous grin that didn't reflect how she was really feeling. What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, right? Besides, don't you think you owe it to yourself to have one weekend where you don't have to be perfect? One weekend where you can just be Lena, not the future Mrs. Caldwell. Lena bit her lower lip, a habit she'd had since college when she was considering doing something she probably shouldn't. When would we leave? Friday afternoon, Avery said, sensing victory. I'll book everything. All you have to do is pack a bag and prepare to have the most fun you've had in years. Lena was quiet for a long moment, staring at her engagement ring. Finally, she looked up at Avery with a smile that was part excitement, part terror. Okay, let's do it. Let's go to Vegas. Avery felt a mixture of triumph and heartbreak as she hugged Lena again. She had just convinced the woman she loved to go to Sin City with her, but it was going to be a celebration of Lena's engagement to someone else. Still, it would give Avery 2 days to pretend that Lena was hers, to create memories that she could hold on to when Lena was married and their friendship inevitably changed. This is going to be amazing, Avery said, and for the first time since she'd seen that ring, she actually meant it. Maybe Vegas couldn't give her the love story she wanted, but it could give her a perfect goodbye to the dream she'd been carrying for 8 years. Little did Avery know that sometimes the most unexpected things happen in the city, where anything is possible. and that this trip to Vegas would change both their lives in ways neither of them could ever imagine. Lena stood in front of her bedroom mirror on Friday evening, holding up two completely different outfits and feeling more nervous than she had since her college finals. On one side was her usual safe choice, an elegant black dress that Ethan had complimented her on multiple times. On the other was something Avery had convinced her to buy during their emergency shopping trip that afternoon, a short red dress that hugged her curves in ways that made her feel both powerful and terrified. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Have fun with Avery, but not too much fun. I can't wait to marry you in 6 weeks. Love you." The guilt hit Lena like a wave. Here she was getting ready for a weekend in Vegas, while her fiancé was home planning their future together. But something about Avery's excitement, the way her brown eyes had lit up when Lena agreed to the trip, made it impossible to back out now. Avery had been her rock through everything: college heartbreaks, career struggles, family drama. If Avery wanted this one wild weekend together, Lena could give her that. The knock on her door interrupted her internal debate. "Lena, the car's here." Avery's voice carried through the apartment, filled with an energy that Lena hadn't heard in months. Lena grabbed the red dress impulsively and quickly changed into it. If she was going to do this, she might as well do it properly. When she emerged from her bedroom, Avery was standing by the window in tight black jeans and a flowing emerald top that brought out the green flecks in her eyes. Lena's dark hair fell loose over her shoulders, and she was beautiful in that effortless way that had always made Avery a little envious. "Wow," Avery said, letting her gaze travel from Lena's face to her shoes and back. "You look incredible." Something in her tone sent color to Lena's cheeks. "Thanks. You don't look too bad yourself." The flight to Vegas ran on champagne. Avery somehow charmed the flight attendant into endless refills, and by the time they landed, they were giggling like teenagers, hatching increasingly ridiculous plans. "We have to see a show," Lena said as their taxi sped down the strip, neon blurring like a kaleidoscope. "And gamble," Avery added. "I'm going to win big at poker and buy you something outrageously expensive." "You don't even know how to play poker," Lena laughed. "Details," Avery said with a dismissive wave. "How hard can it be?" Their Bellagio room was unreal. Floor-to-ceiling windows over the fountains, a king-sized bed dressed in crisp white linens, and a bathroom larger than Avery's entire apartment. Guilt pricked Lena about the cost, but Avery had insisted they split everything and refused to downgrade. "This is amazing, Avery. But are you sure you can afford this?" "It's Vegas, baby," Avery declared, flopping onto the bed. "You only live once, and you're only getting married once." She paused, then added with a grin that didn't quite reach her eyes, "Well, hopefully." Lena lay beside her, both of them staring up at the ornate ceiling. "I can't believe I'm actually here. Ethan would have a heart attack if he knew we were staying somewhere this expensive." "Ethan isn't here," Avery said quietly, turning to look at Lena. "This weekend is just about us. No fiancés, no responsibilities, no planning the perfect wedding. Just Lena and Avery living dangerously." There was something intense in Avery's gaze that made Lena's heart skip a beat. But before she could analyze it, Avery was jumping up and pulling her toward the bathroom. "Come on, we need to get ready for dinner. I made reservations at this incredible restaurant on the 35th floor of the Eiffel Tower replica." Dinner was magical in a way that Lena hadn't expected. The restaurant overlooked the entire strip, and the champagne Avery kept ordering made everything feel dreamlike and surreal. They talked about college memories, shared embarrassing stories, and laughed until Lena's cheeks hurt. It felt like the old days before Lena's career took off, when it was just the two of them against the world. "Remember that time sophomore year when you convinced me to sneak into the art building after hours so you could finish that sculpture?" Lena asked, gesturing with her champagne glass. "And we got caught by security." Avery's eyes sparkled with the memory. "You were so scared you were going to get in trouble and lose your scholarship." But you still helped me carry all those supplies up 3 flights of stairs. That sculpture won you the departmental prize. Lena reminded her. It was worth it. You've always believed in me, Avery said softly, her voice suddenly serious. Even when I didn't believe in myself. That's why. She stopped, seeming to struggle with her words. That's why what? Lena prompted, leaning forward across the small table. Avery shook her head, forcing a bright smile. Nothing. That's why you're the best friend anyone could ask for. After dinner, they wandered through several casinos, Avery losing modest amounts at slot machines while Lena watched with amused disapproval. At the Venetian, they took a gondola ride through the artificial canals, Avery serenading Lena with off-key versions of Italian love songs. That made both of them dissolve into laughter. You're terrible, Lena gasped, wiping tears from her eyes. Absolutely terrible. But you love me anyway, Avery said, and there was something vulnerable in her expression that made Lena's chest tighten. I do, Lena said simply, and meant it in ways she was afraid to examine too closely. By 11 p.m., they had made their way to a trendy bar where a DJ was playing music so loud they had to lean close to hear each other speak. Avery ordered something called a Vegas bomb and convinced Lena to try one despite her protests that she had already had too much to drink. Come on, Avery shouted over the music. When are you going to get another chance to be completely reckless? The drink was stronger than anything Lena had ever tasted, and within minutes, she felt the last of her inhibitions dissolving. The music seemed to pulse through her body, and when Avery grabbed her hand and pulled her onto the makeshift dance floor, Lena didn't resist. They danced, pressed close together, Avery's hands on Lena's waist, Lena's arms around Avery's neck. The world narrowed to just the two of them, bodies moving in time, faces a breath apart. Lena caught Avery's perfume, saw the gold flecks in her brown eyes, felt the heat of her through the thin dress. Lena, Avery said, her voice barely carrying over the music. There's something I need to tell you. What? Lena leaned closer, her lips nearly brushing Avery's ear. Before Avery could answer, someone crashed into them, jolting them apart. Sorry, a drunk college kid shouted, stumbling off with his friends. The moment snapped. Avery stepped back, and Lena felt suddenly, strangely bereft. What were you going to say? Lena asked, but Avery was already shaking her head. Nothing important. Come on, let's get another drink. The rest of the night blurred into neon and bass and increasingly inventive cocktails. They took selfies with Elvis impersonators, won stuffed animals at the casino arcade games, and around 2 a.m. wandered into a 24-hour chapel where Avery dared Lena to try on a wedding dress. From the window display, I'm already getting married in 6 weeks, Lena protested, laughing as she said it. This is different, Avery insisted. This is Vegas wedding dress shopping. Completely different category. They stumbled into the chapel, giggling uncontrollably, where an enthusiastic woman in sequins showed them racks of elaborate white gowns. Lena found herself trying on a ridiculous confection of lace and rhinestones, while Avery played Wedding March on the chapel's cheap keyboard. You look beautiful, Avery said when Lena emerged from the dressing room, and something in her voice made Lena look at her more carefully. Avery's expression was soft and sad and loving all at once, and Lena felt something shift in her chest, some recognition she wasn't quite ready to name. Avery, she started to say, but then the chapel owner was there asking if they wanted to book a ceremony, and the moment passed. By 3 a.m. they were back in their hotel room, makeup smeared, hair disheveled, both of them collapsing onto the big bed fully clothed. That was the best night I've had in years, Lena said, staring at the ceiling as the room spun gently around her. Really? Avery turned to face her, propping herself up on her elbow. Even better than all those fancy dinners with Ethan. Lena was quiet for a moment, thinking about Ethan's idea of a perfect evening. Expensive restaurants where they discussed his work and their wedding plans. Everything planned and predictable and safe. Yeah, she said quietly. Really? They lay there in the darkness, and Lena became aware of Avery's breathing, of the warmth of her body just inches away. Avery, yeah, I'm glad we did this. I'm glad you convinced me to come. Avery's voice was soft when she replied. Me, too, Lena. Me, too. The last thing Lena remembered before falling asleep was the feeling of Avery's hand, finding hers in the darkness, their fingers intertwining like they had so many times before, but somehow different now, charged with possibilities that Lena was too afraid and too drunk to examine. Tomorrow would bring consequences and complications, but tonight in the artificial paradise of Las Vegas, anything seemed possible. Lena woke up with the feeling that someone had used her head as a drum all night long. Sunlight filtered through the hotel curtains, creating golden rays that seemed to pierce directly through her eyeballs. She groaned softly and tried to move, but something heavy was keeping her pinned down. When she finally managed to open her eyes, she realized that Avery was curled against her, her arm wrapped around Lena's waist, breathing softly against her neck. Lena stayed very still, trying to process what she was feeling. Avery's closeness wasn't new. They had shared beds on previous trips, comforted each other through breakups. But something was different this morning. There was an intimacy in the way Avery held her, like they belonged together in a way that made Lena's heart race despite her pounding headache. That's when she noticed it, the cool metal band on her left ring finger. But it wasn't her engagement ring for Ethan. This was something else entirely, a simple silver band that felt foreign and yet somehow right. Lena's blood turned to ice as she slowly lifted her hand to examine the ring more closely. Her movement caused Avery to stir, and when Avery's hand came into view, Lena saw an identical silver band on her ring finger. Avery, Lena whispered, her voice zero and panicked. Avery, wake up. Avery's eyes fluttered open immediately, squinting against the harsh Vegas sunlight. Ugh, what time is it? And why does my mouth taste like I licked the strip? Avery, look at your hand, Lena said, holding up her own hand to show the mysterious ring. Avery blinked several times, trying to focus on her ring finger. When she saw the silver band, she sat up so quickly that Lena thought she might fall off the bed. What the hell is this? Avery stared at the ring like it might bite her. Lena, why are we wearing matching rings? Lena's mind was racing, trying to piece together the fragments of the previous night. She remembered the dinner, the dancing, the chapel, where she had tried on wedding dresses while Avery played the keyboard. But everything after 2 a.m. was a complete blur. Oh God, Lena whispered, scrambling to find her phone. Oh God, oh God, oh God. She found her phone on the nightstand and immediately checked her photos from the previous night. What she saw made her stomach drop to her toes. Photo after photo of her and Avery in what appeared to be a wedding ceremony. There they were standing in front of an Elvis impersonator, both wearing the white dresses from the chapel. There was Avery lifting Lena's veil and kissing her while a crowd of strangers cheered in the background. There was Lena sliding the ring onto Avery's finger, while tears of joy streamed down both their faces. Avery, Lena's voice was barely a whisper. I think we got married. Avery grabbed the phone with shaking hands, scrolling through the photos with increasing horror and disbelief. This can't be real. This has to be some kind of joke. We were just trying on dresses. We were just playing around. But then Avery found the video, a 3-minute recording of them exchanging vows in front of Elvis. Both of them clearly intoxicated but speaking with passionate sincerity about eternal love and devotion. In the video, Avery was telling Lena that she had loved her since college, that she had never wanted anything more than to call Lena her wife. And Lena was responding that Avery was her soulmate, her other half, the person she wanted to grow old with. I need to see if this is legally binding, Lena said, grabbing her laptop with trembling hands. Maybe it's just a fake ceremony. Maybe it doesn't count. But a quick Google search confirmed her worst fears. Nevada marriage licenses were indeed legal and binding, and the Chapel of Eternal Love, where they had apparently tied the knot, was a legitimate wedding venue. "We're married," Lena said, staring at the screen in shock. "We're actually legally married." Avery was sitting on the edge of the bed, her head in her hands. "Lena, I am so sorry. I don't know what happened. I don't remember deciding to do this. I must have been completely out of my mind drunk." Lena looked at her best friend, her wife, and felt a tangle of panic, guilt, and something she couldn't name. "What am I going to tell Ethan? Our wedding is in 5 weeks. Avery, 5 weeks, and I'm married to my best friend." "We'll get it annulled," Avery said quickly, her voice a little tight. "It's Vegas. This must happen all the time. We'll find a lawyer. We'll fix it. No one ever has to know." Lena nodded, though something in her chest cinched at the idea of erasing what had happened. "Right, an annulment. We can pretend this never happened." But as she said it, her gaze drifted back to the photos. In every shot, she and Avery were glowing radiantly happy, like two people genuinely, completely in love. And in the videos, the open tenderness in Avery's eyes made Lena's heart stutter in a way that had nothing to do with the hangover. "We should probably shower and get dressed," Avery said, avoiding her eyes. "I'll call some lawyers, see our options." Lena started toward the bathroom, then paused at the doorway. "Avery, in the video, when you said you've loved me since college, was that just the alcohol talking?" Silence stretched so long Lena thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, Avery looked up, and the pain and vulnerability in her brown eyes stole Lena's breath. "I don't know," she said softly. "I honestly don't remember saying it. But, Lena, even if I did, it doesn't matter now. You're engaged to Ethan. You have a plan, a future that doesn't include me like that." This was a mistake. Lena stared at her for a long beat, feeling 1,000 things rise to her lips and no words that could hold them. "Right," she finally managed. "Just a mistake." But as Lena stood under the hot spray of the shower, she couldn't stop thinking about the way it had felt to wake up in Avery's arms, or the expression of pure joy on both their faces in the wedding photos. She kept replaying the video of Avery's vows, the sincerity in her voice when she talked about loving Lena forever. For 8 years, Lena had thought she knew everything about her best friend. But if Avery had been in love with her all this time, what else didn't she know? And more importantly, what did it mean that hearing Avery's drunken confession of love had made Lena's heart race, instead of making her uncomfortable? When Lena emerged from the bathroom, she found Avery on the phone with what sounded like a lawyer's office, taking notes about annulment procedures and waiting periods. The conversation was practical and efficient, exactly what Lena would have expected from Avery in a crisis. But Lena couldn't help noticing that Avery's voice sounded hollow, like she was going through the motions of fixing a problem she didn't really want to solve. "Good news," Avery said when she hung up. "We can file for an annulment based on intoxication and lack of intent. It'll take a few weeks to process, but it's definitely doable." "That's great," Lena said, though the words felt like ashes in her mouth. "So this whole thing will just disappear, like it never happened," Avery confirmed, but she wouldn't meet Lena's eyes. They spent the rest of the morning in awkward silence, packing their belongings and preparing to catch their afternoon flight back to Riverton. But as they waited for their taxi to the airport, Lena found herself staring at the silver ring she was still wearing, wondering why the thought of taking it off made her feel like she was losing something precious she had never even known she wanted. The flight back to Riverton felt like the longest 3 hours of Lena's life. She and Avery sat in awkward silence, both staring out their respective windows, the weight of their shared secret hanging between them like a physical barrier. Lena kept fidgeting with a silver ring, which she had moved to her right hand to hide it from casual observation. Every time she looked at it, her stomach did flip-flops that had nothing to do with turbulence. When they finally landed at Riverton International Airport, Avery was the first to speak. "So, I guess this is where we pretend everything is normal and go back to our regular lives." Lena nodded, though the word normal felt foreign on her tongue. "I guess so. I should probably get home to Ethan. He's been texting me all weekend asking how the trip went. Avery's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Right? Ethan, your fiancé. They shared a taxi back to Crown District. And when it stopped in front of Lena's building first, Avery grabbed Lena's hand impulsively. Lena, whatever happens with the annulment, whatever we decide to tell people about this weekend, I need you to know that you're the most important person in my life. That hasn't changed. Lena felt tears prick at her eyes. You're important to me, too, Avery. You always have been. Avery nodded and released Lena's hand, but not before Lena noticed that Avery was still wearing her wedding ring, too. I'll call you when I hear back from the lawyer. Lena's apartment felt sterile and cold after the warmth and chaos of Vegas. Ethan was waiting for her with takeout from her favorite Thai restaurant, and a bouquet of white roses, her favorite flowers. There's my beautiful fiancé, he said, wrapping her in a hug that felt suffocating rather than comforting. I missed you so much. Tell me everything about your wild weekend with Avery. Lena forced a smile and launched into a carefully edited version of their trip, focusing on the shows they'd seen and the restaurants they'd visited, while carefully omitting any mention of chapels, wedding dresses, or silver rings. Ethan listened with the polite attention of someone who was interested but not particularly invested, occasionally checking his phone for work emails. It sounds like you had fun, he said when she finished. Though I have to admit, I'm glad you're back. Mrs. Caldwell called today about the flower arrangements, and your mother wants to discuss the seating chart for the reception. I told them you'd call them tomorrow. The name Mrs. Caldwell, her future identity, made Lena's chest tighten. For one wild weekend, she had been Mrs. Bennett, Avery's wife, and the memory of that felt more real than the wedding planning. That was supposed to be the most important thing in her life. That night, as Ethan slept peacefully beside her, Lena stared at the ceiling and replayed every moment of their Vegas wedding that she could remember. The more she thought about it, the more details came back to her. She remembered the moment when Avery had first suggested they actually go through with the ceremony. How Avery's eyes had been bright with tears when she said Lena was the most beautiful bride she'd ever seen. She remembered feeling like her heart might burst with happiness when Avery had kissed her, after they were pronounced wife and wife. But more than anything, she remembered the feeling of absolute rightness, like she was finally exactly where she was supposed to be. The next morning, Ethan left early for work, kissing Lena goodbye and reminding her about their dinner reservation that evening. To celebrate her return, Lena was still in her bathrobe, nursing her second cup of coffee when Avery called. The lawyer can see us this afternoon, Avery said without preamble. 2 p.m. at his office in Midtown. Can you make it? Yes, Lena said, though something in her stomach twisted at the thought of officially ending their marriage. Avery, are you okay? You sound I'm fine, Avery interrupted. I just want to get this handled as quickly as possible. The sooner we file the paperwork, the sooner we can put this whole thing behind us. But Avery didn't sound fine. She sounded tired and sad and like she was forcing herself to be practical about something. That was breaking her heart. Lena found herself wanting to comfort Avery, to tell her that maybe they didn't have to rush into the annulment, that maybe they should talk about what had happened between them first. Lena, are you still there? Yeah, I'm here. I'll see you at 2. The lawyer's office was everything Lena had expected. Mahogany furniture, diplomas on the walls, and a middle-aged man in an expensive suit who looked like he handled celebrity divorces and discreet family scandals. So he said, reviewing the paperwork Avery had brought, "You ladies want to know a marriage that took place in Las Vegas this past weekend, due to intoxication and lack of intent to actually marry." That's correct, Avery said firmly. We were both extremely intoxicated and we have no memory of making the decision to get married. It was clearly a mistake. Lena noticed that Avery was very carefully not looking at her during this conversation. I see, the lawyer said, and you're both in agreement about this annulment. There are no financial assets to divide. No disagreements about the dissolution. We're in complete agreement, Avery said before Lena could speak. We just want this mistake erased as quickly as possible. The lawyer nodded and began pulling out forms. Very well. I'll need both of you to sign these documents, and then I'll file with the court. The process typically takes 3 to 4 weeks in cases like this. Lena stared at the papers in front of her, her pen hovering over the signature line. All she had to do was sign her name, and her marriage to Avery would be erased forever. It would be like their perfect day in Vegas had never happened, like the moment of pure happiness she'd felt when Avery had kissed her after their vows had been just an alcohol-induced fantasy. Mrs. Bennet, the lawyer prompted. I need your signature on the first page, Mrs. Bennet. Lena realized that she liked the sound of that more than Mrs. Caldwell, and the thought terrified her. Lena. Avery's voice was soft, concerned. Are you okay? Lena looked up to find Avery watching her with worried brown eyes. I need a minute. Can I use your restroom? The lawyer pointed down the hall, and Lena escaped to the small bathroom, where she splashed cold water on her face and stared at her reflection in the mirror. She looked pale and confused, like someone who had lost something important, but couldn't remember what it was. When she returned to the office, Avery was signing the last of her paperwork with quick, efficient strokes. Lena sat down and picked up her pen, but her hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold it. Avery, she said quietly, can I talk to you outside for a minute? Avery looked surprised but nodded, and they excused themselves to the hallway. What's wrong? Avery asked. You look like you're about to be sick. Lena took a deep breath, trying to find the courage to voice the thoughts that had been swirling through her mind since they'd woken up that morning. Is this what you really want? To just erase everything that happened? Avery's expression became guarded. Lena, we talked about this. It was a mistake. We were drunk. We weren't thinking clearly. And you're getting married to Ethan in 5 weeks. What else can we do? We could talk about it, Lena said desperately. We could try to understand what happened, why we did what we did. Avery, I've been thinking about what you said in those vows about loving me since college. And I stop. Avery interrupted, her voice sharp with pain. Please don't. I can't do this, Lena. Can't sit here and dissect my feelings for you when I know that at the end of the day, you're going to go home to Ethan and plan your wedding to him. It's too hard. Lena felt tears beginning to sting her eyes. But what if I don't want to go home to Ethan? What if waking up married to you felt more right than anything else in my life? Avery stared at her for a long moment, and Lena could see the war between hope and self-protection playing out across her features. You don't mean that, Avery said finally. You're just overwhelmed. This whole situation is insane, Avery said. Give it a few days. When the shock fades, you'll remember you love Ethan and the life you've planned with him. What if I don't? Lena pushed. What if I realize I've been choosing safe instead of fighting for what I really want? Avery let out a thin, humorless laugh. And what is it you really want, Lena? The question hung there, dangerous and full of possibility. Lena understood this was the hinge: choose certainty and predictability, or jump into the unknown. I want to see what happens if we don't sign those papers, she said quietly. I want to know what it's like to be married to my best friend, to wake up next to you, to build a life with someone who knows me better than I know myself. Avery's eyes shone with unshed tears. Lena, you can't be serious. 5 weeks ago, you were perfectly happy with Ethan. You can't toss your whole future because of one drunken night in Vegas. Can't I? Lena challenged. For 8 years, you've been the person who matters most. My call when I'm happy, when I'm terrified, when I'm lost. You believe in me when I don't. Maybe Vegas wasn't a mistake. Maybe it's the first honest thing I've done in years. Silence fell in the hallway, broken only by their breathing. At last, Avery spoke, barely above a whisper. If we do this, if we skip the annulment, there's no going back. You'll have to break up with Ethan, call off your wedding, let your family down. Are you ready for that? Lena pictured Ethan waiting at home, the dress hanging in her closet, the tidy future that was safe and expected. Then she saw Avery's smile when she'd first seen her in that dress, remembered being held all night by someone who loved her without conditions. Imagine the terrifying, beautiful chance to build something real with her best friend. I don't know, Lena admitted, but I know I'm ready to find out. They stood in the lawyer's hallway for what felt like forever. Lena's words suspended between them like a bridge neither was sure they could cross. Avery searched Lena's face for any sign this was panic talking. Are you absolutely sure? She asked, voice unsteady. Because once we go back in there and say we're not signing, everything changes. There's no undoing it. Lena reached for her, threading their fingers the way they had 100 times before, only now it felt like a vow. Avery, I've spent the last 8 years playing it safe, making the practical choice, doing what everyone expected me to do. But when I woke up married to you yesterday morning, for just a moment before the panic set in, I felt something I've never felt with Ethan. What? Avery whispered. Like I was home, Lena said simply. Like I was exactly where I belonged. Avery's composure finally cracked and tears began streaming down her face. Lena, I've been in love with you since the night you helped me finish that sculpture in college. I've watched you date other people. I've celebrated your engagement to Ethan. I've pretended to be happy about your wedding planning. And it's been killing me slowly. But I never said anything because I thought you could never feel the same way about me. Lena brought their joined hands up to her lips and kissed Avery's knuckles gently. Maybe I couldn't before. Maybe I was too scared or too conditioned to think I had to follow a certain path. But Avery, when I look at those wedding photos from Vegas, I see two people who look completely radiantly happy. I see myself looking at you the way I should look at the person I'm going to spend my life with. But what about Ethan? Avery asked. What about your family? Your job? Lena, your entire life is built around being with him. Lena closed her eyes, thinking about the conversation she would have to have, the disappointment she would cause, the gossip and judgment that would follow. It would be messy and painful and complicated. But for the first time in years, the thought of facing those challenges didn't fill her with dread. It filled her with determination. Ethan deserves someone who loves him the way I love you, Lena said. Someone who doesn't spend their engagement feeling like they're settling. And my family, they'll adjust. They love me. And eventually they'll understand that I need to be with someone who makes me feel alive. Avery was crying harder now, but she was also smiling. Are you really saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying that I want to try, Lena said firmly. I want to see what happens if we're brave enough to admit that maybe getting drunk and married in Vegas was the smartest thing we've ever done. Avery laughed through her tears. This is crazy. This is completely insane. So, I was flying to Vegas for a bachelorette party and ending up married to my best friend, Lena pointed out. But sometimes the best things in life are a little crazy. They walked back into the lawyer's office hand in hand, both of them still crying but looking more determined than they had all day. The lawyer looked up from his paperwork with raised eyebrows. Ladies, are you ready to complete the annulment paperwork? Actually, Lena said, her voice steady and clear. We've changed our minds. We don't want the annulment. The lawyer blinked in surprise. You don't want to dissolve the marriage. No, Avery said, squeezing Lena's hand tighter. We want to stay married. But earlier, you said it was a mistake that you were both intoxicated and had no intention of actually marrying. The lawyer said, clearly confused. Lena smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. Maybe we were wrong about our intentions. Maybe sometimes your subconscious knows what your conscious mind is too afraid to admit. The lawyer shook his head but gathered up the annulment papers. Well, this is certainly a first for me. Are you sure you don't want to take some time to think about this decision? We've had 8 years to think about it, Avery said. We're ready. As they left the lawyer's office, Lena felt like she was walking into a completely different life than the one she had woken up to that morning. Her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan asking what time she wanted to meet for dinner, and her stomach clenched with anxiety about the conversation she was about to have. "I have to tell Ethan tonight," she said as they stood on the sidewalk outside the building. Avery nodded, though Lena could see the fear in her eyes. "Are you sure you're ready for that?" "No," Lena admitted, "but I'm ready to try to be ready." "Avery, this isn't going to be easy. There's going to be gossip and judgment and people who think we've lost our minds." "Probably," Avery agreed, "but we'll face it together as wives." The word wives sent a thrill through Lena that she had never felt. When people talked about her upcoming marriage to Ethan, she was someone's wife, Avery's wife. It was terrifying and wonderful and completely unexpected. They decided to go to Avery's apartment to give Lena time to prepare for her conversation with Ethan. Avery's Harborview studio looked different to Lena now, not like her best friend's chaotic art space, but like a home she might help organize, a life she might help build. "So, what happens now?" Avery asked as they sat on her paint-stained couch, still holding hands like they were afraid to let go of each other. "Now I go home and have the most difficult conversation of my life," Lena said, "and then I guess we figure out how to be married to each other." Avery brought their joined hands to her lips and kissed Lena's knuckles, mirroring the gesture Lena had made in the lawyer's office. "For what it's worth, I think we're going to be really good at being married to each other." "What makes you say that?" Lena asked. "Because we already know each other's worst habits, and we still choose to spend time together," Avery said with a grin. "Plus, we've been each other's emotional support system for 8 years. Now, we just get to make it official." Lena leaned over and kissed Avery softly, their first sober kiss since Vegas. It was soft and tender, like returning home. "I love you," Lena breathed against Avery's mouth. "I love you too," Avery said, "and I promise I'll spend the rest of our marriage making sure you never regret choosing me over the safe option." As Lena gathered her things to head back to her apartment and to the conversation that would reshape everything, she realized that, for the first time in her adult life, she wasn't picking the practical route or the one that kept everyone else comfortable. She was choosing love real, complicated, beautiful, even if it meant disappointing people and stepping into uncertainty. "Call me as soon as you're done with Ethan," Avery said. "I'll be waiting." Lena nodded, taking one last look around Avery's place, their place now. She supposed tomorrow they'd begin the hard work, building a life together, explaining their choice to friends and family, learning how to be wives instead of just best friends. But tonight, Lena had to close one chapter before fully opening the next. What awaited with Ethan would hurt, but it was necessary. She owed him the truth, and she owed herself the chance to build something real with the person she'd apparently loved all along without daring to admit it. As she walked toward the subway back to Crown District, toward the talk that would change everything, her fingers brushed the silver ring and she smiled. Sometimes the best decisions are the ones that scare you most. At 7 p.m., Lena stood outside her apartment door, key trembling in her hand, ready to tell Ethan the engagement was over. The silver ring felt both terrifying and steadying, a constant reminder of her choice and of the woman waiting across town. She'd rehearsed the words a dozen times during the ride, but nothing prepared her for his bright, excited face when he opened the door. "There's my beautiful fiancé," he said, pulling her into a hug that felt more suffocating than ever. "I've been thinking about the honeymoon all day. I found this amazing resort in Tuscany perfect for us." Guilt tightened in her chest as she eased herself gently from his arms. "Ethan, we need to talk. Can you sit down?" Something in her tone must have alerted him because his smile faltered slightly. "Is everything okay? You've been acting strange since you got back from Vegas." Lena sat across from him on the couch where they had planned their wedding, where she had said yes to his proposal, where she had pretended to be happy about a future that now felt like a cage. "Ethan, I need to tell you something, and it's going to be difficult to hear." His face went pale. "You're scaring me, Lena. What happened in Vegas?" Lena took a deep breath and pulled off her engagement ring, setting it gently on the coffee table between them. I can't marry you, Ethan. I'm so sorry, but I can't. The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan stared at the ring, then at Lena, then back at the ring as if he couldn't process what he was seeing. I don't understand, he said finally. Did something happen? Did I do something wrong? No, Lena said quickly. You didn't do anything wrong. You're a good man, Ethan, and you deserve someone who loves you completely without reservation, without wishing they were someone else. Ethan's eyes filled with tears. But I thought you did love me. We've been together for 4 years, Lena. We have a wedding planned, a future mapped out. I know, Lena said, her own tears beginning to fall. And I thought I loved you the way you deserve to be loved. But Ethan, in Vegas, I realized something about myself that I can't ignore anymore. What? His voice was barely a whisper. Lena reached into her purse and pulled out one of the wedding photos from Vegas. The one where she and Avery were kissing after being pronounced wife and wife. I fell in love with someone else. Someone I should have realized I loved years ago. Ethan took the photo with shaking hands, studying it for a long moment. This is Avery, he said slowly. Your best friend, Avery. Yes, you married Avery in Vegas. Yes. Ethan set the photo down carefully and looked at Lena with an expression of such profound hurt that she felt like her heart was breaking. How long, Lena? How long have you been in love with her? I think I always have been, Lena admitted. I just wasn't brave enough to admit it to myself. I thought what we had was safe and stable and what I was supposed to want. But Ethan, I've never looked at you the way I look at Avery in that photo. I've never felt about you the way I feel about her. Ethan stood up and walked to the window, his back to Lena. So, our entire relationship was what? A lie. 4 years of my life wasted on someone who was in love with someone else. It wasn't a lie, Lena said desperately. I cared about you. I still care about you. But caring isn't the same as being in love. And you deserve someone who is completely, desperately in love with you. Ethan laughed bitterly. Well, this is certainly not how I imagined this evening going. My fiancé comes home from her bachelorette party married to another woman. He turned around and Lena could see that he was crying. What am I supposed to tell people, Lena? What am I supposed to tell my parents? Your parents, all the wedding guests. Tell them the truth, Lena said quietly. That sometimes people change. That sometimes you realize you want something different than what you thought you wanted. And what about the deposits, the venue, the flowers, the photographer? What about the life we planned together? Lena's heart ached for him, for the pain she was causing, for the dreams she was shattering. I'll take care of the wedding costs. I'll call everyone. I'll handle the cancellations. Ethan, I never wanted to hurt you. He was quiet for a long time, staring out at the city lights. Finally, he spoke. Do you love her? Really love her? Yes, Lena said without hesitation. More than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. Ethan nodded slowly, wiping his eyes. Then I guess there's nothing more to say. I want you to be happy, Lena, even if it's not with me. But I need you to leave tonight. I can't look at you right now without thinking about how stupid I was to believe you actually wanted to marry me. Lena packed a bag while Ethan sat in silence on the couch, occasionally picking up the wedding photo and staring at it. When she was ready to leave, she stopped at the door. Ethan, for what it's worth, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to figure this out before I said yes to your proposal. You're going to find someone amazing who will love you the way you deserve to be loved. Just go, Lena, he said without looking at her. Please, just go. The taxi ride to Avery's apartment felt like the longest journey of Lena's life. When Avery opened the door, she took one look at Lena's tear-stained face and red eyes and pulled her into her arms. How did it go? Avery asked softly. It was horrible. Lena sobbed against Avery's shoulder. He's devastated and he has every right to be. I feel like the worst person in the world." Avery guided her to the couch and held her while she cried, stroking her hair and whispering reassurances. "You did the right thing, Lena. It would have been worse to marry him when you're in love with someone else. But I hurt him so badly," Lena said. "4 years of his life, all those plans, you gave him the chance to find real love." Avery said firmly, "You could have gone through with the wedding and made both of you miserable for years. Instead, you were honest about what you wanted." Lena pulled back to look at Avery, seeing nothing but love and understanding in her brown eyes. "I'm scared, Avery. What if we can't make this work? What if being married ruins our friendship?" Avery cubed Lena's face gently. "Then we'll figure out together. But Lena, we've been there for each other through everything for 8 years. We know how to communicate, how to support each other, how to work through problems. We're not starting from scratch. We're building on the strongest foundation two people can have." Lena kissed Avery softly, tasting the salt of her own tears. "I love you so much it scares me." "I love you, too," Avery said. "And we've got the rest of our lives to learn how to be married to each other." In the weeks that followed, they worked through the messy business of merging their lives. Lena moved into Avery's studio for the time being while they hunted for a larger place together. Telling family and friends was rough. Some offered support, some were stunned. A few were openly disapproving. Lena's mother cried for 3 straight days and called it a phase. Avery's parents, surprisingly, were warm and welcoming. The worst part was unraveling the wedding. Lena spent hours on the phone with vendors, explaining, absorbing fees, navigating cool professionalism, and the occasional pointed judgment. Through all of it, Avery stayed by her side, squeezing her hand during hard calls, helping draft cancellation emails. 3 months after Vegas, they signed a lease on a sunlit 1-bedroom in Park Slope. Huge windows for Avery's canvases, plenty of room for Lena's architecture books and drafting table. Their first night there, they cooked dinner and ate it perched on moving boxes, the furniture still in transit, watching the sunset pour through the glass. "Do you ever regret it?" Lena asked, sharing a bottle of wine. "The way we did it, the chaos, the hurt, the people we disappointed?" Avery thought for a moment. "I regret that Ethan was hurt. I regret how hard this is on your family. But I don't regret marrying you even if we were drunk in a tacky Vegas chapel. I don't regret finally being brave enough to tell you how I felt. And I don't regret that you were brave enough to choose love over security." Lena clinked her wine glass against Avery's. "To being brave enough to choose love. To being brave enough to choose each other," Avery corrected. 6 months later, they had a proper wedding ceremony in Avery's parents' backyard, surrounded by the friends and family who had come to understand and support their unconventional love story. Lena wore a simple white dress that Avery had helped her pick out, and Avery wore a suit that made Lena's heart skip beats. As they exchanged vows, they had written themselves sober this time, but no less heartfelt. Lena thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. It had started with desperation and ended with joy, begun with deception, and ended with the most honest love she had ever experienced. "I promise to love you not just in the easy moments, but in the difficult ones," Lena said, looking into Avery's eyes. "I promise to be brave enough to choose you every day, not just once in a Vegas chapel, but in all the small moments that make up a life together." Avery's vows were equally beautiful. "I promise to love you enough to let you be exactly who you are, not who I think you should be. I promise to be your best friend and your wife, your biggest supporter, and your most honest critic, your adventure partner, and your safe place to land." When they kissed after being pronounced wife and wife for the second time, Lena felt the same rush of rightness she had experienced in Vegas. But this time, it was accompanied by the certainty that came from making a choice with a clear mind and a full heart. As they danced their first dance as a properly married couple, Avery whispered in Lena's ear, "So, Mrs. Bennett, any regrets about that wild weekend in Vegas?" Lena smiled and pulled Avery closer. "Just one." "What's that?" That it took us so long to get drunk enough to be honest about what we wanted. Avery laughed. The sound Lena had fallen in love with years before she was brave enough to admit it. Well, here's to being honest about what we want for the rest of our lives. And here's to best friends who become wives, Lena replied, even if they have to get married twice to get it right. As they swayed to the music under the string lights Avery's father had hung in the trees, Lena realized that sometimes the best love stories didn't follow the conventional path. Sometimes they started with classified ads and fake relationships. Sometimes love begins with a drunken mistake that turns out to be the smartest choice you ever make. Sometimes it means burning down the life you thought you wanted so you can build the one you actually need. And if you're lucky enough to find someone worth being brave for, someone you'd choose again and again, then all the chaos, confusion, and hard conversations become the price of a love story worth telling. As Avery spun her across the makeshift dance floor, Lena knew without a flicker of doubt that their story, unconventional, messy, and absolutely perfect, was worth every jolt of fear and uncertainty it took to find their way back to each other. If you enjoyed this content and want to support the channel in a special way, try clicking the thanks button below, the one with the heart and $ icon. With super thanks, you can make a direct contribution to the channel, which helps me keep creating videos you love.